It was supposed to be the kind of evening you tuck away and take out on hard days when you need proof that your life meant something. I still think about the way my grandson looked at me from the head of that long table, his cap still tucked under his arm because he refused to let anyone put it down, like he couldn't quite believe the day was real yet. It was his law school graduation dinner, 3 years of night classes while working full-time at a warehouse, 3 years of watching him fall asleep over textbooks at my kitchen table because his apartment was too loud to study in. He had done it. He had earned every bit of the letters that would soon follow his name, and that night, surrounded by the people who loved him, he finally let himself believe it. The restaurant was a steakhouse out on the edge of town, the kind with dark wood paneling and low lighting and a wine list thicker than a phone book. My daughter-in-law, Denise, had booked it weeks in advance. She wanted it perfect, and money wasn't going to stand in the way of that. I remember settling into my seat at the head of the table and looking around at everyone I loved most in this world gathered under one roof. My daughter Angela sat near the middle, radiant, unable to stop glancing at her son like she still couldn't believe he was a grown man about to practice law. Her husband Tom had his arm draped over the back of her chair, quiet and content the way he always was at family gatherings. My younger brother Walter sat across from me, cracking jokes about how the breadbasket cost more than his first car. My neighbors of almost 20 years, the Faradays, were there too, because in a lot of ways they'd watched my grandson grow up right alongside me. And then, there was my son, Craig. He sat 2 seats down, nursing a glass of bourbon, quieter than usual but smiling in that tight, practiced way he did when he was trying to seem present at something he didn't really want to be at. Craig ran a used car lot on the east side of town, one that had been struggling for the better part of 2 years. He had a wife who'd left the previous spring, a house he could barely afford, and a chip on his shoulder that had been growing heavier by the month. I knew things were hard for him, I just didn't know how hard, or what that hardness had been quietly turning into. I'd worked 41 years as a machinist before I retired, put both of my kids through school, buried my wife 6 years ago after 38 years of marriage, and raised my grandson the last stretch of the way when his father, my son, had been too consumed with his own struggles to show up for him. I didn't say that with bitterness, I said it as fact. I had built something out of my life, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, and that night, sitting at that table with the candlelight flickering off the wine glasses, I let myself feel proud of it. I closed my eyes for just a second and thanked whoever was listening for the family in front of me. That was when everything came apart. Craig's chair screeched back against the hardwood floor so hard that 2 people at the next table turned to look. The sound cut through the warmth of the room like a blade through fabric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. My brother's fork froze halfway to his mouth. And Craig was standing now, his face flushed a deep, mottled red, his jaw locked tight, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He slammed his palm down on the table hard enough to rattle the silverware and send a ripple across the surface of every water glass. "My money's gone," he said, his voice low at first, almost disbelieving, and then rising fast into something sharper. $900. It was in my jacket. It's gone. Nobody moved. Denise reached for his arm, and he shook her off without even looking at her. Angela's face went pale, her eyes darting from her brother to me and back again, searching for some explanation that made sense. My grandson, Ethan, still in his cap and gown, looked at his father like he was seeing a stranger wearing his father's face. "Craig," I said, keeping my voice level, the same voice I used to use when he was 17 and about to do something he'd regret. "Sit down. It's probably in the car. Or you left it at the counter when you paid the valet." "I counted it before we walked in," he snapped, cutting me off. $900. In an envelope, in my inside jacket pocket. I had a payment due Monday on the lot. I need that money, and nobody at this table has left since we sat down. His eyes swept across every face like he was cataloging suspects. Somebody at this table is a thief. The word landed like a slap. Denise's hand flew to her mouth. 3 Ming. Walter's jaw tightened, his easy humor from a moment ago completely gone. The Faradays exchanged a look, clearly wishing they were anywhere else on earth. I felt something cold settle low in my stomach, a feeling I hadn't had since I was a young man getting called into a foreman's office for something I didn't do. "This is Ethan's night," Angela said, standing halfway out of her seat, her voice cracking. "You are not doing this right now, Craig." Sit down. I'll write you a check for $900 myself if it means this stops. I don't want a check, Craig said, turning on her with a viciousness that made her flinch. I want to know who went into my pocket. He walked, deliberate and heavy-footed, to the private room's double doors and turned the lock on both of them with a click that seemed to echo far louder than it should have. Then he turned back to face all of us, breathing hard, like a man who had just barricaded himself into his own fury. "N.A. Nobody's leaving until I find my money," he said. "I don't care whose birthday it is, whose graduation it is, who you are to me. Everybody empties their pockets. Purses, jackets, all of it." I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the way they always did these days. "Craig, this is your nephew's graduation dinner. Your family is not a lineup. Whatever's going on with you, this isn't the way to handle it." He didn't even look at me when he answered. His eyes were scanning the table like he was hunting for something specific, someone specific. And then they landed on me and stayed there. He crossed the room slowly, his footsteps loud against the wood floor, until he was standing directly in front of my chair, close enough that I had to tilt my head up to meet his eyes. I felt 60 years fall away in an instant. I felt like a boy standing in front of a man twice his size. "You first, Dad," he said. Quiet, cold. "You're the one who's never trusted me anyway." I heard my granddaughter-in-law gasp somewhere behind him. I am. I saw Ethan's face crumple in disbelief, his cap finally slipping from under his arm and hitting the floor, forgotten. This was supposed to be his night. Instead, he was watching his grandfather get accused of theft by his own father in front of the neighbors who had known this family for 2 decades. I looked around that table one more time. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody could quite believe what was happening enough to intervene. So, I stood there and raised my hands, palms out. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Search me, Craig. Go ahead." His hands weren't gentle. They patted down my jacket roughly, more like he was trying to prove a point to the room than actually search for anything. He got to the inside breast pocket of my blazer, and I watched his face change the instant his fingers closed around something inside it. His eyes went wide. A slow, sick smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that had no joy in it at all, only vindication. "Got you," he whispered. He pulled his hand out and held up a folded stack of $100 bills. 9 of them. $900. Right there in my pocket, in front of everyone I loved. The room seemed to tilt. I stared at that money like it was something from another planet, something that had no business existing in my hand. I hadn't put it there. I knew that with absolute certainty. But knowing something and having 30 pairs of eyes stare at you like you're a stranger are 2 very different kinds of knowing. "He stole it, that," Craig said, turning in a slow circle, holding the cash above his head like a trophy pried from a corpse. "My own father, right here in front of all of you. Look at him." "I didn't take your money," I said, and my voice shook this time, because it was true and because nobody in that room seemed to believe it. "I would never take from you, Craig. I don't know how that got there. Don't lie to me," he shouted, his voice cracking with something that sounded almost like relief, like he'd been waiting his whole life to have a reason to say what came next. "You've looked down on me since the day Ethan's mother left. You've never once believed I could run that lot without help. Now I know exactly what you think of me. A thief raising a thief, is that it? No, you're the thief, old man. I should call the police right now." That was when a small voice, thin and trembling, rose up from the far end of the table. "Dad, stop." It was Ethan, still in his cap and gown, tears cutting tracks down his face, but standing now, his shoulders squared in a way that made him look, for just a moment, like the lawyer he was about to become. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath around the question. "Ethan, honey, you don't understand," Craig said, his voice softening only slightly, the way it always did around his son. "Your grandfather is a thief. I had to expose him." "No," Ethan said, shaking his head slowly. "He's not. Grandpa didn't take anything." He looked around at the frozen, horrified faces of his family, his aunt, his grandmother's old neighbors, and took a breath that shuddered all the way through him. "This is my fault. I'm the one who put that money in his pocket." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt in my life. Craig's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. "What did you just say?" "I put it there," Ethan repeated, louder now, his voice gaining a strange, terrible strength. "I saw you counting it in the car before we came in. I saw you slide the envelope into your jacket. When you got up to argue with the valet about parking, I followed you in and I took it out of your pocket, and when we sat down, I slipped it into Grandpa's jacket while everyone was getting seated." "Why?" Craig breathed, his face draining of color, the trophy of cash suddenly looking like nothing more than paper in his shaking hand. "Why would you do that to him? To me?" "Because I knew what you were planning," Ethan said, and now the tears were falling freely, but his voice never wavered. "I heard you on the phone 2 weeks ago. I heard you tell Uncle Walter's neighbor that you were going to make sure everyone at this dinner saw Grandpa for what he really was. That you were going to teach him a lesson for never giving you money for the lot. I didn't understand what you meant until tonight when I watched you lock those doors." Craig's face was a wreck of denial and disbelief. "That's not, I never said that I was going to." "You did," said a new voice. It was Walter, my brother, rising slowly from his seat, his usual easy humor entirely gone from his face. "I was standing right next to you when you said it, Craig. I told myself you didn't mean it. I told myself you were just letting off steam. I should have said something. I'm sorry I didn't." Craig looked at his uncle like he'd been struck. Then he turned back to his son, grasping for anything solid to hold on to. "Even if you put it there, Ethan, that doesn't change anything. He had it in his pocket. That's still theft, technically. That's still F. Craig." Angela's voice cut through the room, low and shaking with a fury I had rarely heard from my daughter. "Listen to yourself. And listen. Your son just told this entire room that you planned to humiliate your own father at your nephew's graduation dinner over a grudge from 2 years ago. And you're still trying to find a way to make this about anyone but you. It was never about the $900, Ethan said quietly, and something in his tone made every single person at that table go still. "This was about the loan you asked Grandpa for 18 months ago, the one for the used car lot expansion. He said no because he'd looked at your numbers and knew the lot couldn't support it, and he told you that to your face because he loved you too much to lie to you. You've hated him for that ever since. You've been waiting for a chance to make him look small in front of everybody, the same way you felt small when he told you no. I felt the memory land like a stone dropping into still water. I remembered that conversation. I remembered sitting across from my son at his kitchen table, looking over spreadsheets that didn't add up, and telling him gently that I couldn't in good conscience hand over $40,000 to a business that was already bleeding money. I remembered telling him I loved him too much to watch him drown further. I had thought he understood. I had been wrong. "You don't know anything about what I've been through," Craig said, but the fire in his voice had gone out of it now, replaced by something smaller, something closer to shame. "I know you locked a room full of your own family in here so you could put your hands on your 70-year-old father in front of the neighbors," Angela said. "I know you were willing to let your son watch that happen. I know exactly what you've become, Craig, and it isn't someone I recognize anymore." Craig looked from his sister to his son to his uncle, searching each face for even a flicker of support. He found none. Denise wouldn't meet his eyes at all, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to hold what was left of her composure together. The Faradays stared down at the tablecloth, wishing themselves invisible. He was standing entirely alone in the wreckage of what he had built that night, holding $900 that no longer meant anything to anyone. "You should go, Craig," I said finally, my voice quiet but with no room left in it for argument. "Go home. We'll talk when you've figured out who you want to be." He stood there a long moment, jaw working, some last flicker of pride trying to find a foothold and failing to find one. Then, without another word, he set the cash down on the white tablecloth like it had burned him, turned, and walked out through the door he himself had locked only minutes before, leaving it hanging open behind him. The moment he was gone, the room seemed to exhale all at once. Denise pressed both hands over her face. The Faradays began murmuring quiet, awkward condolences, already edging toward the exit, though I couldn't blame them for wanting to leave the wreckage behind. Walter came around the table and put a heavy hand on my shoulder, saying nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying between us. Angela was crying into Tom's shoulder, and Ethan, my brave, brilliant grandson, crossed the room and wrapped his arms around me so tightly, I nearly lost my footing. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he whispered into my ear, his whole body shaking. I didn't know it would go this far. I just knew he was planning something, and I panicked, and I thought if I could catch him in the act somehow, everyone would see the truth before he could hurt you. I didn't think it through. "I'm so sorry your night got ruined too." "It's not ruined," I told him, holding him the way I used to when he was small enough to carry. "It's your night, Ethan. You did nothing wrong tonight except love your grandfather more than you loved your own comfort. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to be proud of for the rest of your life." We stayed in that private room another hour after everyone else's nerves had settled, and slowly, carefully, the evening found its way back to something resembling celebration. Someone ordered another round of the good wine. My brother told the story about the breadbasket again, badly, but it made people laugh in the tired, grateful way you laugh after a storm passes. Ethan opened the gifts we'd all brought. At some point, someone put on music low enough that it felt like background rather than distraction, and for a little while it almost felt like the night we had all shown up for. But underneath all of it, I couldn't stop thinking about my son walking out that door alone. In the weeks that followed, the story made its way through the family the way these things always do, in phone calls and quiet conversations at kitchen tables. Craig's marriage, already strained before that night, didn't survive it. Denise moved out within the month. His car lot, which had been limping along on the goodwill of a few loyal customers and increasingly patient creditors, finally folded that winter when word got around town about what kind of man he'd shown himself to be that night at the steakhouse. People talk, even in a city as big as ours. Ethan didn't speak to his father again for the better part of 2 years. Craig became, in the family's quiet shorthand, the uncle nobody mentioned at holidays, the empty chair everyone had learned not to look at too long. I won't pretend I didn't grieve for him. He is still my son. I held him the day he was born. I taught him to change a tire and cast a fishing line and shake a man's hand like he meant it, and somewhere along the way, a wound I never meant to give him had festered into something I couldn't have imagined. I think about that lone conversation more than I'd like to admit. I wonder sometimes if there was a version of that night at his kitchen table where I could have said the same true things in a way that didn't leave a scar behind them. I don't know. 5. I've turned it over so many times I've worn the memory smooth, and I still don't have an answer that satisfies me. But I also know this. I didn't lose a son the night he locked those doors. Whatever I lost, I had already been losing slowly for 2 years, in the missed calls and the short visits, and the way his eyes had started sliding past mine at family dinners. That night didn't create the distance between us. It only finally made it visible enough for the rest of the family to see it too. What I gained that night, I did not expect, and I have never once taken it for granted since. My grandson, barely 24 years old, stood up in a room full of people twice his age and told the truth about his own father, knowing it would cost him something. He chose me, not out of duty but out of something deeper, something he'd built with me over years of Tuesday night dinners and long drives to campus and every ordinary hour we'd spent together while his father was busy elsewhere. That is not something you can manufacture. That is something you earn slowly, one unremarkable evening at a time, without ever knowing it's accumulating into anything at all. Ethan graduated top of his class that spring, passed the bar on his first attempt, and now works downtown at a firm that does the kind of work that actually helps people who can't afford to fight for themselves. He still comes by every Sunday for dinner, still calls just to talk about nothing in particular, still signs off every phone call the same way he has since he was small. Last year, at Thanksgiving, he stood up before we ate and said that whatever kind of man he'd become, whatever kind of lawyer he was learning to be, he owed most of it to watching how I'd carried myself that night at the steakhouse, how I hadn't fought back with anger even when I had every right to. I don't know if that's true. I think I was mostly just too stunned to do anything but stand there. But if that's the story he needs to carry forward, I won't argue with him about it. What I've come to understand, in the years since, is that family isn't a guarantee. It isn't something that simply exists because of shared blood or a shared last name. It's something you build, deliberately, meal by meal and Sunday by Sunday, and it's something that can just as easily be dismantled by resentment left too long to rot in the dark. My son let a wound fester until it turned into something he couldn't control anymore, and it cost him almost everything he had. My grandson chose, again and again, in 100 small ways nobody was keeping score of, to show up. And in the end, showing up was the only thing that mattered at all. I still keep that graduation photo on my mantle, the one of Ethan in his cap and gown, taken just moments before everything fell apart that night. He's laughing in it, unaware of what's about to happen, still just a young man proud of what he's built. I look at it sometimes and I think about how close we came to losing that night entirely to Craig's anger, and how, instead, it became the night I learned exactly what my family was made of. Not the money, not the accusation, not even the betrayal, but just the quiet, stubborn love of a boy willing to stand in the wreckage of his own father's making and tell the truth anyway. That, I've decided, is the only kind of legacy worth leaving behind.